Have you ever approached podcasting from a more testing and figuring out kind of way? Today's guest does, and I love Tabatha's approach to her podcast. She said, I'm going to be on 100 shows this year as a guest, and I'm going to show up weekly for an entire year and see what happens. Just test it out, invest in this, and actually get my voice and my message out into the world. And I love this approach. I think that it's so needed in podcasting and creativity, just being able to explore things, have fun with things, and not expect quick monetization or anything like that right away. Really invest in the craft and get better and enjoy it along the way. Please join me in welcoming Tabatha to the podcast as she shares her podcasting journey. Hello, Tabatha. I am so excited to chat with you today. If you could start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, and about your podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Alicia, for having me. I am Tabatha Thorell. My podcast is called The What Went Wrong, The Untold Stories of Bouncing Back. I really started this podcast because, let me fast forward. I started a podcast in 2018 because I was a fitness and lifestyle coach. And, I had all these tips and tricks and people are like, oh, you need a podcast. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. So I just jumped in and I was like, okay. And I got an intro and I was doing it. And then I realized this takes a lot of work. I can't just like sit and talk and do it. And I think you can do it that way. I just didn't know all the things at the time. And my whole focus of doing this was to give back to my audience, but then also to grow my business. Like that was a number one thing for me. And so I was like, if this is not generating revenue, if this is costing me more time, if there's a better way that I can increase my revenue, I'm going to do that. And so I think I have like 8 episodes on that one. And, it kind of fizzled out. And honestly too, I kind of felt like, how can I stand out? And I just, imposter syndrome. And, so I just stepped back and was like, no. So, and my business was changing and I didn't know if that's what I wanted to continue to do. So I stopped. But then as I grew my business and my relationships, a friend of mine was like, you're building these relationships, but you have no platform for these relationships to come to. Are you going to do a live event every month and invite them or what? You need a podcast. You need a podcast. So he was probably telling me this for almost a year before I was finally like, okay, Christopher, like I'll do this, but like, I don't know how to do it all and I can't do it all. I'm a mom to 5. I run multiple businesses. Like my time is very valuable. And I'm not saying that a podcast isn't valuable, but I know what it takes to put into this. And I know that podcasts don't automatically just start generating revenue. So I was like, how can I do this? So he's like, I have a guy and he is amazing. Just talk to him. So I was like, okay. I set up an interview with him and we started talking and he pretty much said, all I need you to do is interview people or like whatever. Like if you don't want to do interviews, whatever, we'll figure out the concept. And I'm like, all I have to do is that and I can send it to you. And he's like, yeah, I can do everything else. And I was like, sold. I can talk like that. I can do. And so what we did is this was probably November, I think is when we kind of started talking concept and stuff. And it went pretty fast because I'm a pretty fast mover. So I'm like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going all in. I said, I knew I wanted to do a podcast about stories because I just feel like people have a story and we want a story. And initially I wanted it to almost be like, like those true crime podcasts, like where you're really like telling the story of somebody and almost have like a narrator. Originally, that's kind of what I wanted, but like true life stories. And I'm still not putting that idea to rest because I just think that there is like some value to that. And I wanted it to be like you told the whole story. And I think there might actually be a podcast already like this, but where you tell the whole story and then at the end, you reveal who it is. And like the whole time you're like, who is this? Who is this? What is this? And so I like that concept of just keeping people on the edge of their seats. And so we went back and forth and said, I really didn't want the title to have like a negative connotation because I'm naturally a positive person, that the title was What Went Wrong. In my head, I'm like, but nothing goes wrong because everything works for you if you look at it different, so I'm like defending my title. And RJ said, Tab, like the thing is like, human nature, people, there's failure, there's wrong things. People are drawn to that. But then in the interview, if you can pull out the positive, the right thing. That's what's going to get them. So I was like, okay, I like that. We just went back and forth and we just developed this podcast and it's still developing. I mean, we're a baby. We just launched in January of 2024. So still getting the right kind of groove and who our audience is. And I mean, we know who we long to serve, but is that who we're really serving? I think that's a journey of itself. But I looked at it like I'm going to give this a year minimum and I'm going to invest X amount of dollars no matter what, even if I don't have any coming in. I'm looking at it like a business. And when you look at anything like a business, you have to take that budget and say, no matter what, like I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to do this, even if it doesn't seem like it's making a difference. And then at a year, I told myself I'd give myself permission. Now we tweak things along the way, but I think in podcasting, because it is a long game, you have to give it that time that it deserves before you shift anything too dramatically, because it's a little bit more forgiving. Like it's not like that instant up and down just because it's like people are listening and have different long-term like binge listening and different things like that. So we might have someone that hasn't ever listened and then all of a sudden they listen to all 24 episodes, in a weekend. So
I love your journey. And what did you say that you launched your first one? Was it 2018 or 19?
I think it was 18. Live Your Fierce Life was 2018, I believe. I'd have to go back.
I mean, even thinking about like I launched my first podcast in 2018 as well. And
Yeah.
you don't really realize how many resources podcasters have available to them now versus
Yeah.
then. Like it's so much
Yeah.
easier to produce a podcast that's quality. Like I saw someone recently on Threads. They were like, "Oh, I want to launch a podcast, but everybody's talking about all these things that you need to do." And like we do full service production, so I know what we have to offer. But
Right.
you still got to be able to provide value, right? And not just say, "Oh, well, just hire me." No, use something like Riverside where they literally write the show notes for you. They literally will give you title ideas. They'll give you
Yeah.
all these things. Use Riverside and then use the transcript in a chat-based AI service and have it write your captions for you. There,
Yeah.
done. Two things that
Yeah.
are very easy and like doable that we did not have back in 2018.
Yes.
So similar to you, like I did the thing, I was podcasting and I was like, this is so fun. Also, it's so much effort. I was working full time, also a mom, not to 5, but to 2. And like, it's just so much effort and I don't think you really realize it until you do it. And then going into your podcast now, I love that your approach to it. And I think that it's so vital. And I try to explain this to people like, you're not going to see results from your podcast right away. It cannot be the only thing that you're doing, and it cannot be the thing that you're hoping makes you money. You have to be hustling on the side to be like bringing money in, then do a podcast. Don't just listen to, the Amy Porterfields of the world who say, everyone, if you have a business, you should have a podcast. I disagree. Like there are tons of other things that you should be doing before you launch a podcast to get that revenue going, and that you're approaching it very similar to how I tell people like a YouTube channel. Would you expect a YouTube channel to be making you money tomorrow? No, you understand that it's a long game, that it takes time and effort. And the same goes for podcasters. And you're spot on. Podcast listeners are bingers. And so as your backlog grows, meaning those episodes that you've already have released, they're evergreen. Most of them are probably not timely. And those listeners are going to go back. And I recently had someone, they said they were going on a road trip from like Virginia to Florida by themselves and binge listened to one of my podcasts. And I was like, I don't even want to hear myself talk that much.
I know.
But okay.
I know. Good for you. Yes. Well, and you just think about like where you're talking about, if you have a YouTube channel, even if you were an athlete, if you were an actor, would you literally be like, okay, I'm going to start acting today? And then would you think that like your first gig is going to be this high paying gig? No, most actors, they are extras for free. Like when you do sports, you've done like peewees in junior high and high school, and even college kind of pays you now, but like, you have to do the thing. But now we live in a society where people are like, oh, you should have this instant thing. And in the defense of the person, marketers are telling people like, oh, you should be able to monetize this. And if you're not listening to the right people. And oh, if you can't have this turnover rate, then oh, da 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 da. And I'm like, I don't know a single thing on this planet where like when you first start, like you've never done anything and you do the first thing and it's like, oh, bam, like here's all this money and resources. I mean, great if you have that influence. You had to work at something first. Like you had to, if you're a celebrity and you start a podcast, yes, of course, you're going to start making money, right? But you've already established something. So if you've already established that, then yes, maybe it would. And even my podcast in 2018, technically it kind of made me money because I was already doing a program that people were listening to and paying for. And how can you really say that it didn't or it did? But I think people just coming into a podcast, just thinking like, I'm going to do 10 episodes. Cause I think that's the mark. I don't know how many people stop before 10. So that's always the golden number, right? Like if I do 10 episodes, then I'm going to start getting all these leads and all these things. And yes, I hope that you do. But you also have to realize too that, like you said, people are binge listeners. And so even if you release a podcast every day, most likely until you get that traction to where then it's like 100-fold, 10-fold, whatever, it takes that time. And so you have to look at it as this is a marketing strategy. Or for me, honestly, Alicia, like I look at it more than just that. I look at it practicing my craft. Every time I do an interview, every time I'm a guest on a podcast, because that was also what I recommend any podcast host is you go on and set a goal. For me, it was 100, but maybe for you, it's 10. It doesn't matter, but like set a goal and say, I'm going to be on 10 other podcasts just so you know the industry. So you know the ins and outs, you know the tonality of your voice. You can be captivating because yes, I know you're videoing this. I video mine, but a lot of them are just listened to. And so you have to use your voice and you only do that by doing. So you have to look at this as like, even if it's just a little small portion of your business, you still have to take it seriously or it's just an expensive hobby. And if you want that to be your hobby, then fantastic. And if your business pays you so you have time to do this and just for fun, awesome. I'm guessing most of your listeners aren't that person. They want to make this monetized. They want to have this as like an arsenal for their business so they get more leads, so they make more impact, so people hear them, connect with them, want to buy with them. You have to practice what you preach. And this is why, like, if people pay for your service or another service, so that then they can just practice on the craft. So the how of doing something, unless you love production. Now, like if you love production of it, then by all means do it. But if you just are doing it because you feel like you have to, what you need to do is figure out how you can fund the production so you can work on your craft, what you love to do, and you don't get burned out so you can keep doing this.
Everyone just kind of sit with that for a second because like mic drop moment. I think it's so important as podcasters and content creators, right? Like there's so much noise everywhere and people, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. And it's like, if you, especially as women, if we can't stand up and use our voice in an impactful way, we're just going to get bulldozed. Everybody else's voices are going to be louder than ours. And podcast listeners, especially women, are looking for women to speak. They're looking out for these voices. And it's so important, especially if you're not ready to have a podcast yet, or maybe you're like, oh man, this is a little difficult. Get out there and get on other podcasts. Test it out. Make relationships with people. I have found that the podcast community is my favorite community to be a part of.
Yes, I agree. Like it's been so fun for me on this journey and like connecting with people. And like you said, it's about getting your voice out there. If you're the host or the guest, it's about getting your voice out there. And you have to practice those skills. And you do that by doing. I get it. You can constantly think, and I do the same thing, especially when we live in scarcity. And there's certain months where I'm like, is this worth it? And I don't know. And it's like, all my coaching clients, whether you're with me for fitness years ago or real estate now, whatever, I always say the why. Now, I think that's like overused now. Like, what's your why? What's your why? No. Like to the core of why you're doing this, because you are going to hit struggles. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if you're doing a podcast. I don't care if you're doing online business, bricks and mortar. If you're a mom, if you're a wife, you're going to hit that struggle. You have to ask yourself why. When your relationship's on the rocks, you better know your why. And when that is unshakable, it doesn't matter. So like in podcasting, we've done one a week this year. So whatever week we're on.
Yeah.
And I've done close to 80 interviews on other people's podcasts. So I'm well into the hundreds, right? And this isn't like, ooh, I'm so good. No, I'm still like, I just did an interview this morning and I felt like I sucked. Like, I was like, that was horrible. I was not as prepared as I usually was. My energy, I just didn't feel it. And the guy's energy wasn't quite as high. And so I was, trying to navigate that and do the things and switch and turn. I'm better than I was in January, but I'm definitely not better than what I'm going to be next January because I'm going to keep continuing this. And I know my why. Like, I know I've committed myself to a year. I'm like, I'm doing this. Unless honestly, my kids go hungry, I'm going to figure out a way to invest in it. And honestly, things like even Podmatch, it's amazing. And it's like $60 a month, so it's like cut out a few eating outs and bam, you have that paid for, right? Even the service that edits all my stuff, I'm constantly like, okay, what can I sell? What, like, from this business, and what do I need to do to get this, even if I break even, because I've committed myself to a year. And the seeds that are planted, guys, if you are, I believe in the Bible. I do a lot of business-based principles in the Bible. And, it's like you plant your seeds and you reap from it, but you have to plant them. You have to water. My husband's a farmer. So we plant in April and we will not see that harvest till October, November. But we also can't just leave the crops or the weeds will overtake them. The drought will overtake them. We have to pay for water. Like, we have to pay for things to help keep the weeds away. So we have to do that in order to reap that harvest. And it can be costly. I don't like to say anything's expensive because expensive is relative, but it's going to cost you. But in the end, if you make a profit, isn't it worth it? So it doesn't matter if this podcast, if it costs you $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month to do this podcast, Alicia, if I told you, hey, but you're going to reap the benefits and you're going to earn $10,000 a month, you wouldn't care about that 2,000. Not that you don't care about money, but it's investing in it, right? It's like money babies. I teach people this in real estate. I'm like, I want to help you make money babies because that's what's it doesn't matter how expensive the house is, because if you are in profit zone, it does not matter even if that was $10 million. We just got to get you that 10 million. So it's finding that basis. It's finding the why and then the resources, the who that is going to help you so you can focus on your craft and what you are passionate about, because nothing can suck my passion away more than trying to do techie stuff. Like, I hate back-end marketing. I hate back-end editing. I hate all of it. Like, it drains me. Even if I have to do another business plan, I'm like, just tell me what content I need to create. Tell me what platform I need to speak on. Tell me, and I will work on my communication skills so that I'm nailing it out of the park. But like, I don't want any of that back end stuff. Like, what's going on with my website? Why isn't this stuff going up? It's driving me bonkers. I don't want to do it. I have, so I hire the who for that. And then I get to focus all my energy and passion on my business, which is just a small portion of my time.
Yeah. Let's talk your podcast and like how it's doing that for you, right? Like, so I was talking to someone recently and he was like, oh, you must be getting thousands of listens every month, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, not really. He was like, well, how do you monetize your podcast? I was like, I've gotten clients from my podcast. They were listening to me talk about this topic for years and they're paying, anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 a month. And that covers the past, that covers the current, that covers the future. Like, that's how I monetize. And it's because I've taken the time to instill it. Now, yours is newer, right?
Yes.
But I like to tell people, like, between your listeners, between the people that you're communicating with and having great conversations with. So how has that impacted you, your business, the connections you've made, et cetera?
So I'm going to turn it a little bit just so your audience can see a new way of looking at reaping the rewards of it. Because I'm going to talk about connections and collaborations. Because a lot of people are like, yes, getting clients. And again, that's my end goal too. I want people to know, like, and trust me, and then come into our high level coaching. Awesome. Great. But I also do it strategically because I'm looking at the podcast host. I'm connecting with them. A lot of people that we meet my husband and I, because we've been real estate investing for 20 years, and they always say, I've always wanted to do that, but then they never do it. And so I stop, I listen, I hear them. So when I'm doing my podcast, whether again, like I'm a guest or a host, I'm listening to them, I'm connecting with them. How can we collaborate in business? Could they be a potential client, or could they add value to my clients that I'm going to get? Could we do an event together? What are their skill sets? Like, I am constantly looking at that. Could I add value to them? Because those are what my friend Christopher calls ROR, return on relationships. Could I, in a year pull it back and be like, okay, Alicia, I'm going to put together a podcast package. Would you be, interested in that? Or when I see other people podcast struggle, I'm like, hey, you should check out my friend Alicia or check out my friend RJ, like whoever. And I have several people that do some of the same things, and I will refer all of them to one person, because you never know what service is going to hit for that person. It's not for me to judge to say only go with RJ because that's who I go with, or only go with Alicia because right? Like, you're going to connect with your audience, and I can just be that bridge, right? Like, I can just be that person, that connector. So when I'm looking at podcasting, honestly, when I first started doing it, I actually didn't even look at it as like a physical, like money maker, like, oh, this is going to make me a lot of money. I used it, like I said, as a platform to bring the connections that I was already making, a place for people to be elevated, to share their message, because I know that those relationships could reach me way more than anything else. And it gives me a platform. It gives me an area to say, hey, let's do something great together. And it makes it simple, because doing like an event or a summit, like those are great, but you have to like really put those together. I could literally call, and I did this for like the first probably 10 episodes. I just called my friends and was like, hey, you want to jump on a podcast with me? Like, hey, let's do this. And so I was able to elevate them. They were able to elevate my podcast, and just getting my voice out there in a different way. So again, it's looking at it in different ways. Yes, it's still a way of monetizing, because the connections and the collaborations will lead to it if you keep going. Now, if you only do 5 or 10 episodes and then you stop or whatever, then there's nothing, right? So it's like to continue that, to keep going. And I'm just meeting incredible people with these stories, and I'm hearing other people listen to like, oh my gosh, that was incredible. I needed that. That was awesome. I'm bringing these stories to light. So it has different layers than just the monetization. But I'm like you. It's like, if I get one client from these interviews, then that pays for the whole year, right? So it's like looking at it at different levels. Yes, you can get sponsorships. Yes, you can do those things, but we do our own midtros. So like affiliate marketing. So if someone even becomes an affiliate with, or, something like that, it's like, that's another layer. And I'm doing that strategically because I'm in control of that. Like, sponsorships and stuff are great, but I have no control over them. And I will not let somebody tell me what I can and cannot say on my own show. So if that's what it leads to, like, that ain't going to happen. Right. So it's like, I want to be in control of that, but looking at it as those connections and collaborations are worth 10 times what, $100 sponsorship's going to do.
And the longevity of it too, right? So like, even if you stop at the end of the year and you've stopped this podcast, you have created upwards of, 150 between your guesting and your hosting relationships that you have created that have allowed you to then grow your business because of these relationships. I recently was referred to someone on Facebook. They like slid in my DMs on Facebook, and I was like, I don't know you, but okay, what do you have to say?
Right.
And she was like, hey, you were mentioned in a local, like, city, nameless city in Oregon Facebook group as someone to help with podcasting. Can we hop on a call? And I was like, who in the world do I know?
I don't even know.
And so I asked her when I got on the call, I was like, I'd love to know who referred me. Like, I'm in North Carolina. I don't live in your small town at all. She was looking for someone local, so it didn't work out. But she was like, oh, it was Ruby. And I was like, I've known Ruby since like 2015, 16. We just kind of circled in the same groups. And like, we never actually had like a full on conversations, but we just know about each other. And I was like, that is so cool. Like, a relationship that I never would have thought of, like, oh, this is going to lead to something. It's like, wow, okay, that's really incredible. So like, you never know what can happen.
Well, and one more thing I want to share with your audience too, something else, because I like to look at how I can make something and all the areas that I can make money from it. Okay. That's just the way my brain works. I'm like, okay, if I'm doing this, it's got to have different, return on investment. And sometimes it's money, sometimes it's relationship. Something else I thought too, if you're starting your podcast or looking at it and you're like, okay, I'm going to give it 10 episodes or a year, whatever. I also said, okay, I'm going to give this a year because at the end of a year, say that my podcast itself doesn't make me any money at all, right? And I'm just like going to shut the doors. I'm done, right? I could take those 50 interviews and make a book.
Yep.
And I could make that book a lead gen, or I could, put it up on Amazon for $20 because these stories were incredible. And all I literally have to do is transcribe them and get permission from most of the people that have done it. I have told them like, this might become a book or like a release of information. So they're fine with it. And it's free promotion for them. So they're like all about it. Right. So I can make this a book, have it done, So looking at it too from these different facets, you could make your podcast a book, even if that's what you do. That could be your mission. I'm just going to do a podcast for a year to get all this information to make a book. If you want to do product research, like for your marketplace, do a podcast because people will come on and give your opinion rather than they'd sit at a computer and do a survey. So bring on people like your ideal audience, bring them on, coach them or do whatever live in the podcast, and maybe they'll become a client right there, or maybe they'll become your survey of what you need for product research for that year. So looking at it in different ways too also sets you apart because then you don't go into it this like needy. Like I think of like a date. Like if you go on your first date and you're like desperate, like, okay, when you're 20, you're not desperate to get married, right? Like you go, you have fun. It's all fun. You don't care. If you're 35, you're going into that date a little bit more like, we got to make this happen. Right. So you just need to go into podcasting like you're in your 20s and just like whatever happens. Cause that's usually where you find the gems. But a lot of people, I think, go into it. I see one of two ways. One, they're just really flighty. Like, oh, it's okay. I just want to make an impact. It's fine. It's no big deal. Sweetheart, I'm sorry. But if you do not put some tenacity and ambition behind that, no one's going to hear your voice. Not because you're not worth it, not because you don't have important things to say, but because you're not loud enough. And you have to market it. You have to put it out there in order to make that impact. Or I see people on the flip side that are like 5 episodes in, like, oh, I'm not making money, I'm going to quit. Right? Like they're too ambitious. Like they're like, if they're not hitting 10K an episode, they're like, I'm done. So it's like, you have to find that middle ground of being like, okay, I just want to go out there and do this. And I have a few different ways that can make it work. And so nothing's ever going to be a failure. And I'm just going to do this and make it work. But I also know that it's not going to happen overnight. So you have to have that kind of ebbs and flows when it comes to podcasting.
Yes. And you have to like be real with yourself too.
Yeah.
I think so often, especially as business owners, right? We'll be like, oh, nobody bought my program or no one signed up for this thing. And it's like, okay, how many times did you talk about it? How many times did you promote it? Did you really give it your all? Or were you just like, people will find it?
Okay. Yeah. Catch me on here. Yeah. No, like that's, I'll just put a plug right now. Mine is What Went Wrong. The Untold Stories of Bouncing Back. Find us on YouTube, like, subscribe, go download it, give us comments, give us reviews. And I tell people that too. It's like, don't be afraid to give me a bad review if you don't like it. Like, I'm not here to say, give me a good review if you don't like it, or if you want to hear more of something, because our podcast is predominantly interviews. But I also, in the beginning, I told stories like of famous people of stuff that you might not have heard of or known. Like you might have heard a little bit of it, but like I try to go deep or find something that maybe somebody didn't know. And so we just did that. And I always tell people, I'm like, if that's what you liked, I'm happy to do more of those. Or, like more stories of business failures or relationship or health or whatever. And you can't please everybody, but I like to hear my audience and say, like, what are you liking? Because this isn't the Tab Show. Like, I know there's a lot of famous people that have their own show. This is What Went Wrong. Like, I'm here to tell you other stories and then pull the insights from the audience. You asked me how I can pull people in to tell their stories, because the premise of mine is really the gut-wrenching story. I mean, I tell people, I give them a caveat from the beginning. I say, I want to go deep. Now, I'm not going to force you, but I just want you to know the deeper you go, the more you're going to connect with the audience. The more the audience connects with you, the more they're likely to buy your book, go to your program, do whatever, and have an impact on their own life, because people can tell when you're just being vague. And I'd say about 70% of my people go deep. I've had a few that I've tried to get them there. Or I mean, like I've worked on getting them there and they still they go, but like, it's like when somebody tells you, hey, they tell you a story. They're like, yeah. And then we were bankrupt and we did the thing and we came up and we got this back. Like they told you what happened, but they didn't show you. And so I've had some people just tell it. And then I've had people that, like, I had one woman, she like almost couldn't like contain herself because she got so emotional in the story. And then at the end, she was like, kept apologizing. And I'm like, no, like that's what people needed in that moment. Like you were able to connect with them on that level. I think I've just always had a way to pull it out of people to make them feel comfortable. One guy after the show told me that he felt like it was a therapy session. He was like, I haven't been back there for, it'd been years since he went through the struggle. And he was like, man, that was like a therapy session. So I'm like, well, then great. Like, I hope you feel better after that. So I don't know. I just make people feel comfortable with their hardships. I've been through a lot of things. I've been through, what I call the bathroom floor moments where you don't want to get up off the bathroom floor and you don't even see yourself taking care of your kids or whatever, because you just can't even get up off the bathroom floor. So I've seen all that. So when I'm talking with someone, like I'm really empathizing with them. And I'm also showing my guest, it's not about them. Because when you have something happen to you, it's no longer your story. Like it is everybody's story. It is meant to be shared after it's happened to you, especially once you've been through it. I would never have somebody in the middle of it do it because it's too raw. But when they have gotten through it and they're on the other side, it is selfish to keep it in. And it is selfish not to become vulnerable. But what the beauty of this and the way God created us is once we are vulnerable and we're in a safe place where I'm not going to jab them, it's a safe environment. When we're vulnerable, it's freeing and it's healing. And so when they do that, when people are sharing their stories, they don't realize, but they're healing themselves. And other people that are hearing it and putting themselves in that place, they're healing. And so they're connected to it. And no matter what tip, trick, or whatever, that doesn't matter. It's like that healing happens in the moment. And then they find out, like, if somebody's in it, like if they're in that bathroom floor moment right now, they might not get through the healing, but they hear how to come out of it and then they come out of it. And so those are two beautiful things that I love about the podcast. And I have to keep in the forefront because I will get businessy and I will get ROI on myself and like, okay, what's this? And then I'm like, no, but I need that bathroom floor moment for somebody. So who can I find that's going to give that to them?
Yeah. I love that so much. We had a dear friend of mine who has a fantastic podcast, but he talks specifically to military personnel and sharing their stories. And it's like,
yes, I love that.
The impact that makes and like the therapeutic stuff that does of like, you're not alone. Someone else has been through what you've been through. And there is another side for you. There is the other side of this feeling and this bathroom floor moment, like you said. And I think that a podcast is such a safe space to do it, right? So if you were to do this live, have these really deep conversations, the tone would be different. The feelings would be different. Whereas here it's just you and one other person having a conversation and then it gets distributed, right? So you have that space to kind of feel into it and be more vulnerable without, oh, they're listening to me right now. So I love that you created that. So good. Well, this has been so much fun and I've loved hearing your podcasting journey and just all about your show and how you're bringing these stories to light. So if you could tell everyone where they can find you, hang out with you, get to know you. I know you mentioned some stuff earlier, but just for anyone who's like, wait, what was that again?
So my YouTube channel is Tabatha Thorell and all of our podcasts are housed on there and every podcast channel as well. If you're just a binge listener and want to like, exercise, road trip, whatever, just listen to any podcast channel. I'm also on Instagram, Tabatha Thorell on Facebook. And then I have our Keep Legacy Wealth website. That's where some freebies are housed, as well as tabthorell.com. That's all my freebies. I mean, like, because I started my journey in fitness and we're clear up into like, we help people with real estate. So everything in between and relationships and stuff is all housed at tabthorell.com.
Awesome. And we will also make sure that we link that in the show notes for anyone who's doing other things. If you're driving, doing other stuff, then we've got those links for you as well as on our website. Thank you so much, Tabatha. This has been so much fun.
Thank you. Thank you, Alicia.